Welcome back, and now with the news in detail. UK All Parties Parliamentary Group on Kashmir chairperson Debbie Abraham says India should reciprocate Pakistan's openness on the occupied Kashmir situation. He said this while speaking to the media alongside Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi in Islamabad. More in this report.
Occupied Kashmir's woes deepen as India's curfew and communications blackout almost touches the 200-day mark. India has continuously restricted foreign dignitaries and UN observers from visiting the occupied valley. Earlier this week, Labour MP Debbie Abrahams, who wanted to visit the valley, was also denied entry. Speaking in Islamabad, the UK lawmaker said Pakistan has promised her an unhindered visit to Azad Kashmir, which shows Islamabad's sincerity. She said New Delhi should follow the same example.
I think it shows the openness and the progressive approach that has been taken by Pakistan on this issue, and I hope India will reciprocate as well.
Criticizing India, second UK MP Imran Hussain said human rights are an international, not bilateral issue. Meanwhile, Foreign Minister Qureshi said the world has now realized the Kashmir issue cannot be ignored anymore. Qureshi said he has apprised the UK MPs on the current crisis in the valley, which has been under India's clampdown since 5th August.
You have seen how the Kashmiris, those Kashmiris that were previously engaging with them, forming governments with them, coalition governments with them, have rejected that action. Today, many organizations within India are calling the Public Safety Act as draconian.
Islamabad has repeatedly urged the international community to take notice of Indian atrocities in the occupied valley. Turkey, Malaysia and the OIC have all condemned New Delhi's unilateral actions in Kashmir.
Indian troops have martyred 3 more civilians in occupied Kashmir's Pulwama district. The civilians were targeted during a cordon and search operation in the district's Taral area. 26 unarmed Kashmiri civilians have been martyred by Indian troops over the past 2 months. Meanwhile, the scheduled local panchayat elections in occupied valley have been cancelled after being overwhelmingly rejected by Kashmiris. Elections were set to be held on over 11,000 seats in the valley on March the 5th. All major Indian political parties, including Congress, National Conference and People's Democratic Party, have already boycotted the polls. The party said that there is no point in contesting the polls when all the top Kashmiri leadership is under arrest by the BJP government. Meanwhile, authorities have registered a case against countless internet users employing proxy servers to avoid a social media ban in occupied Kashmir. Police say they have misused social media to propagate a secessionist ideology. They added that the internet users could be charged under a law which allows the government to designate them as terrorists. The valley has been under a communications blackout since August 2019, when India stripped the region of its autonomy. The tight internet restrictions in occupied Kashmir have been slammed by the rights activists worldwide. In a related development, Iltija Mufti, daughter of occupied Kashmir's jailed ex-CM, says Indian brutalities are pushing Kashmiris towards Pakistan. Mufti has become one of the loudest voices for the 8 million Kashmiris suffering under New Delhi's curfew. In an interview, she said there is a lot of anger among Kashmiris at Indian atrocities, which have increased after the illegal annexation. Slamming the lockdown by the BJP government, Mufti said the clampdown has led to an economic, psychological and emotional crisis. She said Indian forces are monitoring the internet usage of Kashmiri youths and imposing controversial laws. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi says the risk of Pakistan being placed in the FATFs blacklist is now over. Talking exclusively to Indus News in Islamabad, Qureshi hopes Pakistan's efforts against terror financing and money laundering would also get the country out of FATF's grey list. More in this report by our correspondent Isa Naqvi.
As the Financial Action Task Force plenary session continues in Paris to discuss money laundering and terror financing issues, Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said Islamabad has made significant progress on the plan of action decided with the Asia-Pacific group of the Financial Action Task Force.
This government, since we've been into office, have taken concrete steps which were recognized and acknowledged in the face-to-face meeting in Beijing.
Expressing confidence that the country is back in the FATFs' good books, the Foreign Minister said India's designs to push Pakistan into the organization's blacklist have failed.
One thing is very clear, that the Indian design to push Pakistan into the blacklist has failed because of the very obvious steps the government of Pakistan has taken. So that is now, I can say that with the cautious optimism that inshallah that will fail. Now the question is the world community going to give allowance to the steps that we have taken and get Pakistan out of the grey list?
Qureshi said Pakistan's delegation led by Finance Minister Hamad Azhar has already given its presentation in the FATF plenary session.
The legislation undertaken, the amendment of rules that took place, the conviction against certain individuals and organizations, the fact that bank accounts were frozen, the fact that assets of certain proscribed organizations were overtaken. This was the presentation of our delegation led by Hamad Azhar.
China, Turkey and Malaysia have already announced their support for Pakistan at the FATF. The FATF is an intergovernmental organization founded in 1989 to develop policies against money laundering. Reporting for Indus News, Isa Naqvi, Islamabad.
Expressing dissatisfaction over US-India trade ties, President Donald Trump says New Delhi hasn't treated Washington very well. The statement comes as Trump prepares to visit India next week. Talking to media in Washington, Trump said he is not sure whether a US-India trade deal will be signed before the November elections. During the visit, New Delhi is set to buy $2.6 billion in military helicopters from the US firm Lockheed Martin. Expressing concern over the deal, Pakistan said this agreement will further destabilize the volatile region. In a statement, the Foreign Office said the international community is fully aware of India's aggressive policies against Pakistan. Meanwhile, the Anti-Citizenship Act protesters in India have refused to quit until the withdrawal of the law. The Indian government has been facing countrywide demonstrations, rallies and sit-ins for the last 3 months. Carrying on the sit-in, Shaheen Bagh protesters in New Delhi have started a makeshift school. The organizers of the school said they are doing this for protesting mothers so their children can learn as the sit-in continues. Meanwhile, a massive rally against the law has been held in Chennai in the southern state of Tamil Nadu. Over 15,000 people took part in the rally, demanding the immediate withdrawal of the act. In a related development, UN Secretary General Antonio Gutteres has expressed deep concern of the discrimination against Muslims in India. In an interview, UN chief conveyed apprehensions over the Modi government's controversial Citizenship Act. The UN Secretary General said he is concerned there is a risk of statelessness for 2 million Muslims excluded by the divisive act. Gutteres said it is pertinent whenever nationality laws are changed, efforts are taken to avoid statelessness. Discussing the reports of human rights violations in occupied Kashmir, he said these must be taken seriously. The UN chief said these reports have clarified exactly what is happening in Kashmir under the Indian-imposed clampdown. Moving on to Afghanistan, where Independent Election Commission has declared Ashraf Ghani the winner of last year's presidential election. But Chief Executive Abdullah has announced he is forming a parallel government. Vice President Rashid Dostum has also backed Abdullah's announced government. This report has the details.
The results of Afghan presidential election brought more confusion than stability to the already uncertain situation in the war-torn country. President Ashraf Ghani has been declared winner for the second time, with main rival Abdullah contesting the final results. According to the commission, Ghani got 50.6% of the vote while Abdullah got 39.52%.
I'm dedicating this victory of the people to the people. And as the first servants with our united team, we will always safeguard the rights of the Afghan people.
Calling the results an act of treason, Afghanistan's former chief executive announced he will form his own government.
Based on transparent and biometric votes, stability and convergence have won this election, and we announce our victory.
Other main rival and militant-turned-politician Gulbuddin Hikmatyar has not issued any statement yet on the results. Held on September 28, the polls were marred by low turnout, allegations of rigging, widespread voter fraud and violence.
UN Secretary General Antonio Gutteres has called for an immediate ceasefire in northwest Syria. In a statement, he expressed alarm at the rapid deterioration of humanitarian situation in Idlib. The UN Secretary General said the only path to stability is a credible and inclusive UN-enabled political solution. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said Moscow will ensure terrorist position in Idlib are completely eradicated. US President Donald Trump said his Turkish counterpart Recep Tayyip Erdogan is trying to avert a humanitarian tragedy in Idlib.
He's fighting on Idlib. He doesn't want people to be killed by the thousands and hundreds of thousands. And he called me about that and other reasons. But we spoke about Idlib and we're working together on seeing what can be done.
A UN report says nearly 900,000 Syrians have been displaced by the recent clashes. Moving on, Russia has warned Turkey against any offensive in northwestern Syria. In a statement, the Kremlin said any operation against Syrian forces would be the worst scenario. It said Moscow is strongly opposed to such an operation. This comes as Ankara threatened to launch an operation in Idlib if Damascus fails to pull its forces back by the end of the month. Speaking in the parliament, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said an operation in Idlib is imminent. Erdogan said Ankara is counting down, and this was the final warning to the Syrian regime. Responding to the warning, Russia said a Turkish military operation against Syrian government forces in Idlib would be a worst-case scenario. Earlier, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said his country and Ankara failed to reach an agreement after talks in Moscow aimed at easing the tensions. As friction rises between Ankara and the Assad regime in northwestern Syria, more and more Syrians are turning to Turkish currency in what is being seen as a sign of growing Turkish influence in the country. More in this report.
Last month, the Syrian pound plummeted to a new low, crashing through 1,000 to the dollar. This was the last straw for Azaz-based bakery owner Hassam Shamo, who found it increasingly difficult to do business using such a low-value denomination. Now, he only accepts the Turkish lira.
Because of the diversity of the prices and value of the Syrian currency, a decision has been made to deal with the Turkish lira because they're available in the country and each citizen can benefit from it. For us as workers, it's better to deal with the Turkish currency.
It's a practical move, allowing Shamo to sell a bag of bread for 1 lira. If he was still accepting the local currency, it would cost hundreds of Syrian pounds. Frequent fluctuation in the denomination's value complicates things even further.
It's better to deal with the Turkish currency, but the problem is that 80% of the people are still using the Syrian pound. We're against it because of the Assad regime. The problems I have to obtain 1 Turkish lira to get a bag of bread. No one will agree to exchange the currency.
And it's not just bakers who have abandoned the Syrian currency. Even jewelers are turning to the Turkish lira.
Following a meeting of the Jewelers Association, we decided to use the Turkish lira in the city of Azaz because of the US dollar and gold's ounce witnessed a limited increase for $10 to $20 in a week or 2 weeks. So a change has happened, but the use of the Syrian pound has deteriorated.
The regime in Damascus has threatened people using foreign currencies with jail sentences. But local authorities in Azaz have recognized the impracticality of the Syrian pound, turning a blind eye to businesses using the Turkish lira. This is just another sign of Turkey's growing presence in the war-torn country.
It's time for a short break. We'll be right back. Stay tuned. Welcome back. In Somalia, Al-Shabaab militants have killed 12 government soldiers and briefly captured a military base in southwestern Mogadishu. A military officer said the base commander was injured in the attack. Police said the Al-Salini base was hit by a suicide bombing, allowing the gunmen to storm in. The military recaptured the base upon arrival of the reinforcements. Al-Shabaab spokesman said the militants took two pickups with mounted anti-aircraft guns. He claimed the attackers had killed 15 soldiers. Al-Shabaab has been fighting the UN-backed Somali government for over a decade. In Yemen, 6 government soldiers have been killed after their convoy was hit by a landmine explosion. Officials said the convoy was also carrying the country's defense minister, but he remained unharmed. The defense minister of the internationally recognized government of Yemen was visiting a frontline area of Sirwa. It is located west of the government-held city of Marib and east of the Houthi rebel-held capital Sana'a. Officials said several others were wounded when the convoy hit explosives buried in the road. Yemen has been mired in conflict since 2014. Landmines were extensively planted in many parts of the country during the fighting. UN envoy to Yemen Martin Griffiths says escalating violence is putting ongoing peace efforts at risk. In a briefing to the Security Council, Griffiths said the fighting between the belligerents broke out in January after months of relative calm. The envoy said the situation in Yemen has only grown worse, with both the sides announcing expensive military goals. Griffiths said the Houthi rebels and the government forces have each given reassurances of their interest in the peaceful political solution, but their current actions contradict their claims. Yemen has been stuck in violence and chaos since 2014, when the rebelling Houthis overran much of the country, including the capital Sana'a. The UN says tens of thousands of Yemenis have been killed since then, while another 14 million are at a risk of starvation. US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has arrived in Riyadh for a 3-day visit after finishing his Africa tour. The State Department said he will meet with Saudi Arabia's King Salman bin Abdulaziz and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. It said the Secretary of State will also meet with Foreign Minister Faisal bin Farhan. Earlier, Pompeo said during his time in Saudi Arabia, he will speak with the kingdom's leadership about security issues and Iran. He said the economic relationship between the two countries will also be discussed. Pompeo will depart for Oman after his visit to Saudi Arabia. The Arab League has urged Lebanon's new government to meet the demands of its people protesting against the economic crisis. Secretary General Ahmed Abul Ghaid said Beirut should execute economic reforms to restore the international community's confidence. He said the Lebanese government should make arrangements to open the way for international aid and attract investment. Ghaid's remarks came during the meeting in Cairo with the United Nations Special Coordinator for Lebanon, Jan Kobis. The Secretary General and Kobis discussed the most important developments and the Beirut's prominent challenges. Lebanon is in need of economic reform to prevent its already dire economy from deteriorating further. Libya's internationally recognized government has suspended its involvement in ceasefire negotiations hosted by the UN at Geneva. This follows an attack by Khalifa Haftar's forces on the Tripoli port, which killed 3 people and injured 5 others. The port authorities said massive material losses from the attack paralyzed maritime traffic. In a statement, the Government of National Accord said it will respond to the attack firmly. UN envoy to Libya Ghassan Salame called the seaport attack a big breach of the ceasefire. Meanwhile, Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu met Haftar to discuss the situation in North African state. The Defense Ministry said Shoigu stressed on the need to fulfill the terms agreed on at an international summit in Berlin last month. The death toll from the new coronavirus in China has now passed the 2,000 mark, with 136 more people dying in the past 24 hours. Over 1,700 have been infected overnight, bringing the total number of people affected by the disease to 75,000. China's National Health Commission says for the first time, the number of the recovered patients was greater than the number of new cases reported. Meanwhile, Hong Kong has reported its second death from the new coronavirus. Elsewhere, hundreds of relieved passengers have disembarked from a coronavirus-hit cruise ship in Japan after being given the all-clear. But health officials said 79 new cases have been detected after the ship remained quarantined for 14 days. With 621 positive cases, the Diamond Princess is the biggest cluster of infected people outside China. The ship was carrying 3,700 people in total. Iran has confirmed its first 2 cases of novel coronavirus in the country. Officials said there was an unspecified number of other suspected cases that have been quarantined. A government spokesperson said the health ministry has confirmed both the cases in the city of Qom. He didn't give the nationality of the 2 people infected, but media reports suggest they were Iranian nationals. Earlier, the ministry said the patients had been put in isolation. German Chancellor Angela Merkel says talks to set the EU's budget for the coming 7 years will be very difficult, while France said it will remain vigilant for unfair competition from the UK if it goes ahead with plans to set up free ports post-Brexit.
Addressing a news conference in Berlin, Merkel said Germany rejected the reduction of rebates in negotiations on the EU budget. She said Germany had a fundamental interest in a successful outcome to an EU summit.
I will say, however, that I do not know if this will succeed. We think our concerns are not sufficiently addressed on many points, and I therefore see very tough and difficult negotiations ahead.
Meanwhile, French European Affairs Minister Amélie de Montchalin says Paris will not indiscriminately sign a post-Brexit deal on 31st December. Montchalin insisted on the importance of establishing customs control on the Irish Sea. At a hearing of the French Senate, the minister said France must not succumb to the pressures of a timetable.
Sous prétexte de signer. Such a deal will stay with us for 20 or 30 years, for several decades. If we sign it half-heartedly and then we regret having it for 20 to 30 years, there's a matter of political coherence to avoid.
The EU leaders will gather in Brussels on Thursday for a special Council summit. The European Council president will seek to ease the blow of spending cuts on poorer countries.
The European Commission has unveiled plans for the future of artificial intelligence in the bloc. The strategy is aimed at regulating the development of AI with the funding of 20 billion euros per year for the next decade. Speaking in Brussels, Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said AI is the technology of the future. She said Europe wants to play a central role in setting the rules for it. Ursula said the high-risk AI that could interfere with people's rights must be tested before it reaches the single market. She said they will create a single market for data in the EU, triggering investments in data spaces and cloud infrastructures.
This is amazing because what I could see today is normally AI is for something which is far away and we don't really understand it. Here I could see how AI is serving the people. And you see applications that help people in their daily life.
The US has said Washington wants its allies to ban Chinese technology giant Huawei. A senior US diplomat said EU countries have no reason to use 5G mobile technology from the Chinese company. Speaking in Lisbon, US diplomat Robert Stryer said Sweden's Ericsson, Finland's Nokia, and South Korea's Samsung are on par with Huawei. He said it was necessary to demystify the notion that Huawei's 5G technology is superior. Strayer said the US is encouraging European countries to think carefully, consider security while rushing forward with using Huawei's technology. The US diplomat said American companies like Dell, Cisco, Juniper, and VMware also want to play a future role. Huawei says it spent $15 billion on research, and no US company can offer the same technology at a competitive price. The US has named 5 state-run Chinese media entities as foreign missions, calling them a propaganda news apparatus. The US State Department says the status will affect Xinhua News Agency, China Global Television Network, China Radio International, and 2 newspapers. Each media outlet will now need to register the locations of any property they own or rent in the US. The organizations will also have to obtain permission to acquire more property and disclose the identity of any employee working in the US, including the American citizens. During the Cold War, most Soviet media organizations operating in the US were classified as foreign missions. More recently, the Vietnam News Agency was named as a foreign mission by the State Department. The United States has imposed sanctions on a Swiss subsidiary of Russian state-controlled oil giant Rosneft over its key role in Venezuela. The U.S. Treasury Department has targeted Rosneft Trading SA and Rosneft Vice President Didier Casimiro for helping sell Venezuelan oil despite sanctions. The move is part of Washington's attempt to increase international pressure on Venezuela's leftist President Nicolas Maduro. More in this report.
Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has held on to power despite a crumbling economy under crippling US sanctions and mounting diplomatic pressure. Rosneft Trading is the largest target of Washington's anger because it works with the Venezuelan state oil company to commercialize the country's crude oil. The US has accused Russia and Rosneft Trading of helping in the repression of Venezuela's people by propping up Maduro.
While Venezuela is undergoing the crisis it is undergoing, the humanitarian crisis, the economic crisis, what is Russia doing? Siphoning money out, not giving aid, siphoning money out, $1.8 billion to Rosneft. That's not even the Russian state, which also gets money.
The sanctions will block any assets of Rosneft coming through the US. It criminalizes any transactions involving those assets within US jurisdiction. Russia has called it a US attempt to bend the world to its will, undermining global commercial freedom. But Venezuela's own opposition leader Juan Guaido has endorsed the US announcement.
Todos los que respeten el Estado de Derecho.
On the contrary, the invitation is for all companies to side with the Constitution and who don't want to finance a dictatorship or to use a company to pass penalties to criminal groups and financiers of terrorism. Today, Maduro finances terrorists. So not only has this company been sanctioned today, but all those who continue to sustain a dictatorship must know that there are consequences for terrorism.
Venezuela's Foreign Affairs Minister Jorge Ariaza said US sanctions are aimed against the country's oil industry, its workers and economy. Ariaza said this country will denounce the sanctions at the International Criminal Court as possible crimes against humanity.
The United Nations says no single country is adequately protecting children's health, their environment or their futures. A landmark report by a commission of over 40 health experts finds every child and adolescent is under immediate threat.
The report, published in The Lancet, ranks the performance of 180 countries on child survival, education, and nutrition rates. Under this criteria, less developed states such as the Central African Republic and Chad perform poorly compared to rich countries. But the rankings are largely reversed when the impact of air pollution from carbon emissions is assessed. Excessive emissions by wealthier nations burden children with additional dangers, from deadly heat waves to the increased spread of tropical disease. The report also highlights the threat children face from harmful marketing of fat and sugar-laden foods, alcohol, and tobacco.
In Pakistan, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province's distinctive traditional music is gaining popularity day by day. There is a revived interest in the tawang and rabab, which are the province's cultural musical instruments. Different musical bands have also started popping up. More in this report.
In Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, centuries-old traditional music is in vogue again. Local people's interest in instruments like the tawang and the rabab is returning. Young people are also putting their own bands together, and ancient tribal traditions are staging a comeback.
Now the situation is good, very good. We can play anywhere, whenever people invite us.
Shops selling musical instruments are also thriving. Pashtun pop singers are also gaining popularity among youngsters.
Music is the spice of life, a part of our culture. What is culture? Culture means satisfying the heart and mind. There is difference between the culture and civilization, but the difference is a nuisance, a bit, which can't be differentiated. So it is a part of our culture, an integral part of our culture.
The emerging singers are also spreading local melodies abroad. Pashtun music is characterized by the rabab, a stringed instrument played to the beat of drums.
This is Pakhtun's culture. They enjoy it and play it in their gatherings. People play mange, rabab and feel happy. We make these rababs and it is known as the king of all musical instruments.
The rabab and tawang are deeply popular among ethnic Pashtuns. Pashtun music is also highly popular in Afghanistan, which has also produced many traditional musicians.
In France, many villages are struggling to hold on to local businesses in an era of e-commerce and out-of-town shopping malls. More than 1 in every 2 communes is without a village shop. An international company has taken an initiative to resuscitate the local cafes in the villages. More in this report.
Thomas Suro wants to breathe life back into a small corner of the forgotten French village of Congrières. The decline in Congrières' fortunes have been mirrored across rural France, where empty properties and vacant storefronts tell the story of a slow business decline.
It is people from the village who asked us to open a business because a cafe is a place where people can talk and everything. The residents of Congrières have asked for it.
The deterioration of local services in small towns helped provoke the Yellow Vest public rebellion against President Emmanuel Macron. The anti-government protests roiled France for months. The demonstrations highlighted how many French people living outside big cities feel hollowed out and ignored by Paris. Suro was handpicked by the company SOS, which expects to reopen 1,000 cafes this year in struggling villages.
There is a fracture across the country with a certain number of villages that are crying out because they don't have any space for activities, any place to get together or to meet people, despite the fact that demographic change is no longer in the direction of leaving villages to flee to big towns. But actually, it has been in the opposite direction for several years already.
The 1,000 Cafe project has received bids from 550 villages, and a human resource of 1,500 volunteers is ready to run the businesses. Suro hopes to reopen his outlet in March, much to the joy of locals.
Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula is riddled with caves, underwater rivers and sinkholes known as cenotes. Now, a project has been launched to preserve and investigate the sites and its historic treasures. More in this report.
Not as solid as it looks, the Yucatan Peninsula in the far south of Mexico is crisscrossed with an underground network of rivers, caves and sinkholes, or cenotes. The more archaeologists explore the peninsula, the more water-filled caves they find and the more Mayan-era artifacts turn up in the waters. Archaeologists have called the area the Great Mayan Aquifer.
This allows us to continue studying. It allows us to keep investigating, preserving, and scientifically revealing the enormous richness that the Great Mayan Aquifer has, which is this enormous body of fresh water that lies underground in the Yucatan Peninsula.
Now, Mexico's National Institute of Anthropology and History, Switzerland's Ministry of Culture, and the National Geographic Society have joined hands to preserve the area. Digital scans will be made of each artifact, so the finds can be easily shared with the general public.
más que una fotografía.
This assures us that we can have an exact copy, more than a photo, a physical object that we can continue to analyze. That's on one hand. On the other, it's a very visual, very attractive technology which helps us create fans for our project, which we hope will be children and students.
Para nuestro proyecto, que esperamos que sean niños.
The project will focus on 6 sea notes known to contain Mayan artifacts and evidence of ancient rituals.
In the US, a small museum in Pennsylvania has found that a painting in its collection is actually the work of 17th century Dutch master Rembrandt. The painting, called Portrait of a Young Woman, was thought to be an original when the museum acquired it in 1961, but the Rembrandt Research Project disputed its authenticity in 1970s. The oil painting was instead attributed to an unnamed artist in Rembrandt's studio. When it was sent to New York University for conservation, experts who removed layers of varnish suspected the brushwork belonged to Rembrandt himself. Outside experts were brought in, and the consensus is now that the portrait was always an authentic Rembrandt. London has hosted the country's biggest musical evening of the year, the Brit Awards. The 40th show was offering only 8 trophies this year, but the ceremony featured some energetic live performances from the best of music from home and abroad. Watch this report.
And the winner is
Lizzo, Capaldi, Harry Styles and Mabel set the stage alight with their live performances at the Brit Awards in London. Teenager Billie Eilish, showing maturity beyond her years, gave life to her song for the upcoming James Bond movie for the very first time. She later took home Best International Female Artist.
I felt very hated recently, and when I was on the stage and I saw you guys all smiling at me, it genuinely made me want to cry, and I want to cry right now. So Lewis Capaldi!
Mabel and Stormzy each won awards for Best Solo Artists, while Foles were won for the Best Group. Among other major winners, they won the Album of the Year, while Lewis Capaldi picked up Song of the Year and Best New Artist.
Thank you so much. This has been the best year of my life. Thanks to everyone like you. Thanks to the label, thanks to my mum and dad.
The Brit Awards have come under fire for the relative dearth of female nominees. No female artists were nominated in either the Album of the Year or the Best Group categories.
More stories to follow right after a short break. The UK says it will not issue visas to low-skilled workers in post-Brexit immigration plans. The government is urging employers to move away from relying on cheap labour from Europe. Home Secretary Priti Patel said under the new system, only the brightest and the best will be able to come to the UK. The new scheme is a points-based system, and immigrants have to reach 70 points to be able to work in the country. Under the scheme, English fluency and offer of a skilled job with approved sponsors awards maximum points. Concern over the impact of high levels of immigration from EU was one of the key drivers behind the 2016 Brexit vote. The government's new immigration plan has to be approved by the UK Parliament before becoming a law. The US stocks have hit an all-time high at the open on signs of slowing coronavirus infections. Markets were lifted over expectations that China would take more measures to bolster its virus-hit economy. Moreover, surge in the shares of Tesla and Apple soared the indexes. The indices of S&P 500 and Nasdaq Composite touched record highs as tech shares outperformed the expectations. The index of Dow Jones Industrial Average also traded in positive territory. Another weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at News Top News.